Hey, it's me, Laura Lee, and I'm here today to talk about The Lions of Fifth Avenue by Fiona Davis and When the Astors Owned New York, Blue Bloods, Grand Hotels in a Gilded Age by Justin Kaplan. So this book I got after reading this one because I got so interested in who were the Astors. So I'm going to start with this. The Lions of Fifth Avenue is a historical fiction book that centers around the Lyons family. The Lyons family, fictionally, were the first caretakers of the new New York Public Library when it was opened on Fifth Avenue. I found out in the book that the Astor family, actually, John Jacob Astor, the first of the American Astors, donated or bequeathed, I guess, $400,000 in his will to the city of New York to start a research library. And the original building, I believe, was in the East Village, and it grew several times over, I don't even know, probably like a 20-year period, maybe? I'm not sure. Don't quote me on that. I'm not sure. I just know that it had several additions. Several of the other following Astors donated money. It wasn't a library where you could go in and check out a book. It was strictly for research purposes. You would come in, request a book, they would bring it to you, and you would sit in the reading room and do your research and then give it to them before you left. Everything was pretty much lock and key. And the Astors donated most of the funds to purchase the books. So, and the artifacts, and then other people came in and also added to that. But in this book, The Lions of Fifth Avenue, the story takes place centrally located around the New York Public Library. And in the earlier ages, the timeline jumps back and forth between the early 1900s when the Lyons family were living in the library itself in the caretaker's apartment. And then later in, I believe it's the 80s or 90s, not sure about that, a young woman that works in the library and actually is a descendant of the Lyons that were the caretakers back in the 1900s. There's a lot of interesting things that happen and crazy things. It's a little bit of a mystery, as well as historical fiction. It's a great story when you find out how the families are connected. There's some missing artifacts and missing books, and over the span of all of these decades, the two robberies, I guess is what you call them, were connected. So it was very interesting. There was a good twist at the end, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. But what happened is I really love that period. I don't know if any of you are watching the Gilded Age on the HBO series that takes place during the late 1800s, early 1900s, of New York, when really the city is growing and booming, and they make reference to the Mrs. Astor in that show, as well as they make reference to the Astors in this book. And I was just kind of interested, who are these people? You know, I've heard their names over and over again. So I went online and found a used bookstore and a copy of When the Astors Owned New York, and literally, the Astors owned New York. So the story starts out with John Jacob Astor, and this isn't a story, this is nonfiction, it's actually factual. John Jacob Astor came to New York as a German immigrant. He was a fur trader, that's where he made his money. That is not how he really grew his money. He grew his money by buying up land in New York, and specifically Manhattan. He owned lots of properties, and then he was one of the first ones to build a hotel. Up until this time period, mostly when you traveled, which a lot of people didn't travel, but when you traveled, you stayed in an inn, something not very fancy. It was not a positive experience. But some of these wealthy landowners decided they were going to build these grand hotels like the world had never seen, and they did. They were building them in Boston, Chicago, and New York. And John Jacob Astor really wanted New York to be the heartbeat of America, social society, and learning, everything. So he built several hotels. And John Jacob was, let's see, the father of two sons. One son was mentally incompetent, so he did not carry on the line. William Bakehouse was his son and his heir apparent to all of the fortune that he amassed. And then William had three sons. And what was interesting to me, and I will say this, because in the front of the book, I had to refer to it because they use the same names over and over again in this family. So I would have to go back and say, which one is that? Who is that? And they're all mixed up. There's a lot of Williams, a lot of John Jacobs, with other names attached to it, but they only refer to the men. They don't refer to the daughters, the wives, very much outside of Caroline Astor, and I'll get to her. So William had three sons: John Jacob III, William Backhouse Jr., and Henry. And Henry basically married beneath him and was pretty much ousted from the family, which was typical of that time period, I think. So the two sons, John Jacob and William Bakehouse, it was divided between them, the family fortune, the business, and then they also had two sons. And what was interesting is over this time period, there was a very big division between the brothers, and then the brothers actually lived next door to each other in New York. Then they had two sons. And first, I think it was William was the first one who tore down his family home and built the Waldorf Hotel. And next to it, William Backhouse tore his family home down and built the Astoria, which later became the Waldorf Astoria. But they didn't get along. They didn't like the way each other did business, all of that kind of thing. There was a lot of family fighting that didn't care for each other. And William actually ended up moving to England, moved to London specifically, and he worked his magic and bought his way into English society, and eventually I think became a Viscount, and renounced his American citizenship. And one of the things that sparked him, there were two things that seemed to spark him to leave. One is the press were relentless in making fun of these people. And two is the Mrs. Astor. So the Mrs. Astor was Caroline Astor, and she was married to William Bakehouse Jr., William's aunt. And she was not really wanting to share her spotlight. She was considered the leader of the 400, which was the elite of New York at that time. And she did not want to share that spotlight with William Waldorf's wife. And she actually went out and had calling cards made that said, the Mrs. Astor. And it was so insulting that William and his wife, I believe her name was Ava, moved to London and ended up staying there and raising their family there. Everything eventually was bequeathed down to sons. Each William and John Jacob both had two sons, more Williams, more John Jacobs. You know, it's just crazy how these people were not very original. The interesting thing to me is that's how far this was basically just a scratching the surface book. I really enjoyed it. I got a lot out of it, but I want to know more. I really want to know more about Caroline Astor. I want to know more about William leaving America and becoming a British citizen. And then all of his efforts to have a British title. It's very clear to me that during this time period, a lot of weight was given to not just your money, but your status. and money didn't necessarily get you status. So a lot of these people were very giving, charitable with their resources in order to buy position. And it's really interesting because they've given a lot to the country and to the city of New York, but I have to wonder, did they give it to the city of New York because they cared or because they were looking for the standing or the notoriety? Because what's interesting about Carolyn Astor, she was very much, if she didn't like you, you were not in. She looked down her nose at the Vanderbilts when they first became profitable and a moneyed family. And they were no different than the Astors. The Astors came from German fur traders. The reason they became so significantly wealthy is because John Jacob Astor was smart enough and had the means to be able to buy up property cheaply in Manhattan before it took off. And then once he was a landowner, building these grand hotels, and to be honest, he was kind of a slumlord too. He had a lot of really horrible tenements that immigrants lived in, the people that worked and built his hotels. So it's very interesting, especially if you're watching like the Gilded Age. These people had two separate personalities, I think, and they did everything they did was for a reason. It seemed well thought out and calculated and orchestrated to grow their wealth and increase their power both financially and socially. I definitely want to know more about this time period. I'd like to read some more about the Astors, maybe a little more details on some of the things I learned in here. I'd also like to learn about the Morgans and the Rockefellers, all those big wigs that built New York. And the reality is John Jacob Astor had a vision. He wanted New York to be the hot spot, and somehow he made it happen. Really interesting. Hope you got a little out of this, enough to spark an interest to maybe read a little bit about the Astors or read a little historical fiction by Fiona Davis. I really enjoy her writing. I hope you like it. If you like my video, comment below, let me know what you think, or if you've read any great historical fiction from that time period, I'd love to hear about it. Have a great day, happy reading, talk to you again soon. Bye.